Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Gentlemen, are you familiar with the case of Staff Sergeant Robert Bales, convicted of the Kandahar massacre, 2012?
Yes.
That was a sergeant who literally lost his mind, walked into an Afghan village and machine gunned 16 Afghans. He's now convicted of that crime, of that war crime, is in life in prison. Do you have any indication that the president is considering releasing, pardoning Staff Sergeant Bales for his war crimes?
Not that
you know of?
No.
I would submit to my colleagues that's a war criminal, and we need to be very careful about very loosely throwing around that term. In the case of Navy SEAL Chief Gallagher, who, by the way, I would remind my colleagues, was acquitted of murder. He was convicted for taking a photo with a dead body. He is now retiring. He is no longer commanding SEALs. He is not going to be promoted. Is it within the president's authority, given the balance of his service, his multiple Valor Awards, his numerous combat tours, to say that retiring, no longer commanding SEALs, not being promoted, but also not being demoted, is that within his authority?
Just to clarify, he was promoted, but he is now retired, and all that was within within the president's authority.
Do you believe that he deserves to be called a war criminal?
I'd have to review what the crime that he was charged with, which was appearing with a corpse. I'd have to read it and understand it. I can come back to you on that.
But he was acquitted of the murder charges,
he was
and
acquitted
in fact, another SEAL admitted on the stand pretty dramatically
that's
that
right.
he was the one that killed, in a mercy killing, knowing that ISIS fighter would be tortured.
He was acquitted of the murder charge, but convicted of holding up the corpse. That would be a violation of the law of armed conflict, as I understood it during my time as a military officer.
And we are over time. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Khanna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and General, for your service. I want to follow up on the exchange you had with Representative Speer. And I understand your position is that the 2001 AUMF gives us the authority to fight ISIS, and that we're there to protect the oil because we don't want ISIS to get it. I disagree with that theory, but I want to bracket that and see if you would at least acknowledge that we don't have the authority to do what the president is calling for. President Trump on October 27th stated clearly, "We are leaving soldiers to secure the oil. Now we may have to fight for the oil. That's okay. Maybe somebody else wants the oil, in which case they have a hell of a fight. It can help us because we should be able to take some also, and what I intend to do, perhaps, is make a deal with ExxonMobil, one of our great companies." Would you acknowledge that this Congress has not authorized in any way the United States to go in and steal Syrian oil and make money off of it?
I'm not aware of the Congress granting any authority along those lines. I'm also unaware of what inherent authorities the president does or does not have in this regard. I'm focused on the military task of denying ISIS access to the oil.
Can you assure us at this point that there are no plans for us to try to take the oil and sell the oil?
All I can tell you is I'm not aware of any plans right now.
The second question I have is regarding the bombshell Washington Post report on the Afghan papers. I imagine you read that. The bottom line is that top military officials and civilian officials have known that the Afghan war has been unwinnable and have been misleading the American public for 20 years. Your predecessor, Secretary Rumsfeld, is quoted there as saying, "I have no visibility into who the bad guys are." Are you embarrassed by Secretary Rumsfeld's comments and the other people quoted, and do you believe they owe the American public an explanation and an apology?
Congressman, I haven't read all the stories, frankly, and so before I comment on what Secretary Rumsfeld purportedly said or didn't say, I'd want to read all that and understand it and actually talk to him. But I do know this much. The story spanned multiple administrations,
certainly,
multiple uniformed and civilian officials, and I think it's good to look back. I think at this point where I'm looking is forward, and forward tells me is the path to success, the win, is a political agreement between the parties on the ground.
But don't you think we have to have some accountability so we don't make the mistake again? Would you support this committee holding hearings on the Afghan papers and calling in front of Congress every official who has misled the American public about whether this war was winnable and all or not? With 2,400 Americans, soldiers dead, 775,000 Americans deployed, don't you think people owe this country an explanation?
Sure. Many of those dead are my friends, and maybe some of my former soldiers. But look, it's the committee's responsibility to determine what it has hearings on. I don't think you want the executive branch making that call.
Mr. Chairman, I would request that this committee hold hearings on the Afghan papers and call before Congress with subpoena every person who has misled this country. And just like in the Pentagon papers, I think that should be one of our highest priorities in examining what has come out in that bombshell report.
If I may, Mr. Connor, we'll pause your time for the moment. I think it's appropriate to have hearings. I will tell you right up front, just to set expectations correctly, I'm not going to call every single witness who has anything to do with this. I do not believe that would be a productive use of the committee's time. I do think it's something that we should take a look at and get explanations from, because I agree with the overall point. But I don't want to set unrealistic expectations about how the committee should approach it. So.
I respect that, and certainly at least having some of the prominent people come and explain to the American public. My final question concerns Yemen, and I appreciate that the administration has voluntarily suspended the refueling of the planes. But we've had a situation, of course, now our own basis in Representative Gates' district, we have Saudi nationals who are being trained and are attacking Americans. And the question, I guess, that the American public is asking is, why in the world would we be providing the Saudi Air Force with any possible logistical help to conduct bombing in Yemen when 10 million civilians possibly face famine?
So, Congressman, we're not providing the Saudis logistical help with regard to their activities in Yemen. We are providing Saudis and 152 other countries training in the United States. Why? Because we have a distinct advantage over Russia and China, who don't have allies and partners. And I think it's important that we continue these programs so that we have a broad network. That's what ensures our security.
Could you commit that we won't help the Saudi Air Force to either logistically or in maintenance to do anything in terms of their bombing in Yemen?
Well, you can define help pretty broadly, right? We probably train Saudi personnel to do maintenance here in the United States. I don't know. But
can we stop doing any maintenance of the Saudi aircrafts in Saudi Arabia and help and not have any of our men and women assist the Saudis in their mission into Yemen?
I'd have to come back with you and let you know what we are or are not doing with regard to the Saudis and what the impact would be on not just the Saudis, because keep in mind, those same Saudi aircraft might be the same Saudi aircraft we call upon to help us blunt an Iranian assault in order to, or help us respond to an Iranian attack. So you got to be thoughtful in terms of how we think through what actions we take or don't take.
And the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the previous administration struggled to effectuate a pivot to the Pacific because its foreign policy got sucked into a black hole in Syria. I think despite a dramatically different approach to Iran in this administration, we face a similar grand strategic challenge, which is to say, if we do not identify a high-impact, light footprint approach in CENTCOM, it will suck up the majority of resources, time, and attention, and Indo-PACOM will not get the priorities and the resources that it needs. In other words, we won't implement the NDS. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask a few questions about China, not Syria, but the two things are linked in my mind as I know they are in yours. Sure. The first is that on September 11th, Representative Gallego and I joined Senator Cotton and Schumer in sending you, Mr. Secretary, a letter about what's called Section 1237 of the FY 1999 NDAA. It requires a regularly updated list of Chinese Communist Party, Chinese military-affiliated companies operating in the United States. We're still waiting on a response. It's 20 years late. We would really appreciate you delivering a response to this letter as soon as possible.
Sure. I'm sorry, but I'm not tracking that, but we'll get on it. It's a good question. I think it's one of the things that concern me. Somebody who's studied China now for a quarter of a century, we need to be very careful about all their activities in the United States, and you've touched on one of them.
I think given your background on the China Commission, you're very well situated to talk about these issues, and indeed did talk very eloquently at the Reagan Defense Forum this weekend. I salute you for that. Almost 1 year ago, On February 2nd, Secretary Pompeo announced that we would be exiting the INF Treaty following NATO's unanimous determination of Russia's material breach of its obligations under the agreement. We formally withdrew on August 2nd. Since then, I believe there's been only one INF range demonstration test, with another coming up shortly, both of which stem from great work being done by SCO. What are you doing, Mr. Secretary, to ensure the two INF range capabilities under development by SCO are being incorporated by the services into their FY21 budget?
Yes, sir. We are supporting those activities with money and technology and all the right people. Having that capability is essential, not just to counter what the Russians have already deployed in Europe, but also, maybe more importantly, vis-a-vis China. China has thousands of intermediate-range missiles along their periphery, along their eastern coast, if you will, and our ability to either blunt or respond to that will rely on intermediate-range missiles of our own, and other ranges too. But I think we need to move out on that as well as with hypersonics and other means, and if the commanders need it, we will deploy it.
And just to follow up on that, there was a FY20 NDAA prohibition on INF range procurement and deployment that I think could be mitigated because the department's current schedule for INF range capabilities, but if there was in other words, you're not going to actually deploy those missiles in the next year or so. But if a similar provision were adopted for FY21, what would be the impact on the department's ability to actually execute the NDS?
Well, I think you made the technical point. It would depend on our current development and deployment timelines. And again, I'm assuming the commanders would need the weapons, and if they do, I want to provide those. But it would take a tool out of our hands. Look, I don't see any possibility that we're going backward. The NATO allies are unanimous that in terms of us getting out of INF, and at this point, our means to either address it with our own system and also to be able to defend against Russian systems.
And then back to where I started, you know, CENTCOM's needs are obvious and apparent every day. You sort of open up a newspaper. But also in EUCOM, we've established a European deterrence initiative that's directed about $17 billion in funding. We don't have a similar, we have an authorized account for INDOPACOM, but we haven't actually funded in the way we've done for EDI. Given the NDS priority on INDOPACOM in China, would a similar dedicated funding mechanism for INDOPACOM be a useful step going forward?
Yes, sir. Maybe. It depends on where you take the money away from. You know, part of our efforts in both Europe and INDOPACOM is to look at how we change our footprint on the ground. So it gets to your point. In that sense, in that principal point, yes. But we're also trying to, with regard to the allies and partners that they can afford to, is help them help us as we expand that footprint.
Well, in a resource-constrained environment, we will have to make choices. And if I believe the logic of the NDS, as I do, INDOPACOM should be the priority. We'll have to assume risk in other theaters.
If I had to pour concrete in some locations, if you will, build bases, I'd rather should be prioritizing INDOPACOM over other locations.
One final question, and I know this is about Syria, but I don't often get the opportunity to talk directly with both of you. It's my understanding that current DoD policy prohibits the U.S. from exercising with the Taiwan Navy, not as a result of any decisions we made in the 70s or the 80s, but this has just been the policy for the last decade. Is it still the policy of the Department of Defense to prohibit bilateral naval exercises between the United States Navy and the Republic of China Navy?
And beyond a yes or no, that's going to have to be for the record, unless you can get it done with a yes or no.
I'll have to get back to you.
Fine.
Okay. Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Dr. Esper, thank General Milley for being here and for your extraordinary service. General Milley, your service is not only extraordinary, but lengthy. If I'm not correct, just looking back briefly on your bio, it goes back to maybe being in Princeton in the ROTC, is that correct? And right around 1980.
That's correct, Congressman, about almost 40 years now.
Thank you. It is extraordinary in length. And I have a question for you quickly in that regard. During that almost 4 decades of service and several presidents having served our country during that period of time, could you share with us other instances where presidents have pardoned war criminals in your experience since you've been in the military during that time?
Presidents have pardoned individuals many, many times. As you know, for example, President Nixon, a very famous case, pardoned Lieutenant Calley, who murdered 130-some-odd women.
During your time, though, during your 4 decades.
40 years.
Long time.
Someone who was alleged to have committed war crimes.
No, but someone that was...
Or was convicted of war crimes.
Can you share with us?
I do not know of one that
I can't think of one either, General.
But it has been done historically.
I know, but 40 years, several presidents, a long time.
Right.
So thank you for that. In your joint statement, both of you said you're focused on internationalizing the response to Iran's provocative activities by encouraging increased burden sharing and cooperation with allies and partners. It's a very important issue. I also serve in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and very recently we had Special Representative for Syria, Mr. Jeffrey, testifying. During that testimony, he did say, and I agree with him 100%, that it was a mistake when he was referencing the pullout of Syria without informing our allies. To me, that's a critical point, because we have something that probably the country that is our greatest threat, China, doesn't. We have something they don't have. We have something Russia doesn't have. We have this extraordinary coalition. I think it's one of the biggest difference makers that we have. And Special Representative Jeffrey, myself, a lot of other people, we're concerned. Those allies weren't even informed about what our action would be, even though they had troops on the ground there. And I'm concerned about not having that kind of notification. What can we do going forward to really make sure we have greater communication? I know that wasn't a decision you made or the military made.
No, but if I may, I know that I personally called our allies. And I believe, I won't speak for the Secretary, I believe he did as well. And I believe some people in the Department of State, perhaps Secretary Pompeo, I don't know about the rest of them. But I know I personally called our allies that were involved in Syria as soon as decisions were made.
How much time was that?
It was very quick.
Like what?
It was quick.
Like what's quick?
Fast.
What's fast?
I'd have to go back and check the phone records. But
Well,
it was very, very
days.
No,
That's pretty fast.
Much faster than that.
A day?
Yeah, it was
So-
inside of that.
Inside of a day.
Absolutely.
That's not what I call having, not that it's your fault, great cooperation and communication. I think it's so important going forward to have this. Now, you're also referencing in joint statement, some of the other countries that are dealing with maritime and navigation issues. And I'm looking at the list, and there's UK and Australia, Albania, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain. There's certain countries that are usual allies in many of these activities with us. Are there instances, or can you share this with us, where we've reached out or communicated to other allies and they haven't done what they quite often do and join us in these? I'm just concerned.
I can speak to that, Congressman. On both the international maritime security construct and the integrated air and missile defense effort, I personally made calls to many allies in both Asia and Europe and asked for assets, and was told either not possible or we'll think about it. And you can see how many are there right now.
I can see how many aren't there, too, that usually are there. That's a concern I have. My time is winding up, but I want to thank you. I just want to highlight this.
Your point of allies and partners is critical. We, the United States of America, depend upon, for access, basing, and other things in military operations, allies. And we want to keep allies close.
And we will have to leave it there. We're getting late.
And we're done.
It's a good point.
So,
and countries that have given blood, too. Thank you.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to make sure that your call and Mr. Khanna's call for hearings on the Afghan papers is a bipartisan one. I believe that those are issues that we ought to look into, and I trust, given your thoroughness, that we will address that. We have been trading the same villages back and forth in Afghanistan for 20 years, and I think the American people deserve answers. Mr. Chairman, I also want to thank you and the ranking member for your work on the NDAA, and I intend to vote for it. But I'm deeply disappointed that it doesn't include the amendment that Mr. Khanna and I worked on to constrain any authorization for use of military force in a regime change war with Iran.
And just for the record, I share your disappointment, but we do have to work with the Senate and the President. So
I know that you worked hard on it. But it just is crazy to me in Washington, Mr. Chairman, that something that passes the House with a very robust majority, every Democrat, dozens of Republicans, it's up in the Senate, more people vote for it than against it, but I guess given the ways of Washington, it can still not be in the bill.
Well,
And
if the
seems
gentleman
a little swampy to me.
If the gentleman would yield for a second, I think you have a much better relationship with the person who's responsible for that than I do. So I would urge you to work on that relationship. So
I work.
The president does have to sign the bill.
I work to be a positive influence on everyone I have the chance to speak with, Mr. Chairman. And I also would suggest that a practical, restrained, and realistic view of foreign policy is entirely consistent with the Trump doctrine. And in that light, Mr. Secretary, it may be a minority view in the Congress, it may be a minority view on this committee, but I fully support the administration's decisions in the Syria and Turkey theater. It is my belief that we ended up in this mess in Syria as a consequence of the prior administration being all over the place on regime change wars in Syria that created second and third order effects that the Trump administration is now having to deal with. And as I see things, in a very challenging and complicated environment where there's been a great deal of war for a great deal of time, you have done all you can to balance regional interests, reduce U.S. risk and the U.S. footprint, and then secure the resources that will function as the leverage for the Kurds to have the greatest opportunity to have a say in their own future. And this notion, repeatedly reflected in this committee on both sides of the aisle, that because we are an ally with a group of people in one instance, because our interests align in that case, that somehow morally binds us to every conflict they have, past, present, or future, is crazy to me. And if we accept that doctrine, it will not enhance the utility of our future alliances. It will diminish them, because we will not be able to engage in those alliances given the complicated world in which we live today. I do want to go back to Pensacola for a moment, because it's very central to the thinking of many of my constituents. I understand that with the Saudi government, we have a status of forces agreement that set this program up. That status of forces agreement has within it, various accommodations for access. But to me, when the uniformed military of another country attacks and kills my constituents who are in the uniform of our country, maybe we don't have to be as faithful to a contract regarding access, but we should be more concerned about ensuring that we contain the terrorism and hold those responsible. So perhaps you can inform me on what role the Status of Forces Agreement is playing in the ongoing diplomatic standoff or negotiation that we're currently having with the kingdom regarding those people currently in custody.
Sure, Congressman. It's a fair question. Excuse me. Sorry. It's a good question. Honestly, I'm not up to speed in terms of what the SOFA says with regard to this case. I'd have to get back to you on that.
Well, it is my sincere hope that is not limiting the work of the FBI or creating unique challenges by having the kingdom make demands to have their embassy personnel interact with people that we're currently holding. And this is a question I get a lot from my constituents. Maybe you can elaborate on it. When people who are the active duty military of another country attack our military in our country, why is that viewed as like a law enforcement event rather than an event like more akin to an act of war, where we would hold these people as prisoners of war, people in conflict, rather than giving them the full complement of the rights articulated in the Status of Forces Agreement?
Well, I'll just say up front, I think we need to let the investigation play itself out. But in this case, I'd say we're obviously Saudi Arabia is a partner. We're not in war with them. We don't actually have any hostility with them whatsoever. So in this case, I look upon it as the act of an individual at this point. Now, we need to find out whether there is more behind it or not. But it was not a state-sponsored action, as best I can tell at this point.
Yeah, I'm not saying it is, but I don't think that the statement that this is the work of an individual is going to age well, Mr. Secretary.
No, I said at this time, that's all I'm willing to say, is we know it's one. We need to let the investigation tell us what else is out there.
At this time,
and that is another argument that we'll have to leave at that point. But I think that is something worth investigating. Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate both of your testimony today and your accessibility. I found both of you under your tenure to be very accessible to the committee, and I do appreciate that. Notwithstanding some of my colleagues on this committee's attempts here today to exercise some revisionist history with regard to blaming issues on the prior administration, the bottom line is that this administration really has no overarching policy in the Middle East and with respect to Syria. It appears just to be a series of fairly ad hoc decisions stumbling from one decision to the next. And there is no greater illustration of the fact that the first week of October, I led a congressional delegation to the region where we met with and discussed security issues with numerous intelligence and military and diplomatic officials, none of whom, by the way, had any idea that we were about to exercise a precipitous withdrawal from northern Syria. And that brings me to my first question, General Milley. Several of those officials expressed a grave concern about the security of those ISIS prisoners in the prisons in northern Syria. And I just wanted to clarify what I heard you say today, that you don't have any concern currently, even though the situation seems to be less secure now than it was in early October, given our much lower footprint in that area. But you don't have any concern about the security of those prisoners. Is that accurate?
South of the 30-kilometer buffer zone, the reports I have indicate that the SDF is still securing the 24 prisons for which they are responsible for. Inside the 30-kilometer buffer zone, we don't have that level of visibility. So I can't say one way or the other. I think there were 7, if I'm not mistaken, from memory, 7 facilities inside that.
In general, did we have that visibility before our withdrawal? Did we have that visibility on those prisons that you just indicated before our withdrawal, and now we do not?
Of course. I mean, they were co-located in some respects, and the SDF had those detention facilities. Since the government of Turkey went into those into that incursion zone, is their personal response, or is there legal, internationally legal response?
From the first week of October, we're in we're in a worse position with respect to oversight of those prisons than we were, or currently now, than we were 2 months ago.
I would say we have less visibility because the Turkish government has responsibility, and we don't have the visibility on those detention facilities.
Next question is, there have been several public media reports about Iranian drones called suicide drones conducting overflight operations of our forward operating bases in Syria, Iraq, and potentially Jordan. Standing here today, if there's an Iranian drone attack on one of our forward operating bases in those 3 countries, do those forward operating bases and do our soldiers have the necessary material, equipment, and intelligence to defend against those attacks?
I would say that, first of all, it's a very serious threat. We are aware of it. And in some cases, we have some capabilities to mitigate the threat. But to say that we can eliminate the threat, that would be a false statement. So, no, we don't have everything we would absolutely want that technology can provide.
I would add that our ability to respond is not unique to Iranian drones. It's a challenge we face writ large, and that's why I recently reassigned the responsibility for counter-UAS systems to the Army as the executive agent. We need to get ahead of this because the offensive technology is changing more quickly than our defensive means to deal with it.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Esper. Last question, General Milley, you're a Special Forces officer and have worked with local forces a lot throughout your career. There's bipartisan concern on the Hill about our lack of kind of standing by our Kurdish and Syrian allies who fought with us in northern Syria. And as a result of that, several of us have led a bipartisan bill called the Syrian Partner Protection Act that would create an SIV program for those fighters and their families and allow them to come to the U.S. if they are in danger. Could you speak very briefly as to the impact, the positive impact that SIV programs have, not only in Syria but in Afghanistan and Iraq, on our ability to demonstrate that we will stand by our partners and continue to recruit partners like that throughout the world?
I think for the United States, as we go forward, regardless of where it is in the world, maintaining allies and partners, both nation states but also indigenous partners like the SDF, are important to fulfill our national security objectives. And anything that we can do to assure them and maintain good faith with them is a positive.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. Mr. Walz.
And I'm proud to join my colleague, Representative Crow, in that expansion of the SIV program, which I think is critical. to our local allies and to our ability to move forward. Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request to submit to the record a letter from the Commander-in-Chief of the Syrian Democratic Forces to this committee.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to return very quickly to this issue of pardons and war crimes. And one of the third case in First Lieutenant Lawrence, I would just kind of conclude that line of thinking and the previous conversation that Lieutenant Lawrence did serve 6 years. I would submit to my colleagues we need to be very careful in equating mistakes, perhaps bad judgment calls that may even get you relieved of command with a war crime. And I, too, have received many texts and a lot of outreach since these pardons, and most of them said that could have been me. And these split-second decisions in the heat of combat, again, making a mistake does not necessarily equal a war crime, and I do think we have to be careful with the signals that we send, and in this case, a very chilling signal that if you make a bad call, that you could go to jail for 20 years. And I would just ask both of you to consider that as we deal with these going forward. General Milley, I'm glad that you mentioned that we are, and clarified that we are fighting ISIS from Africa to Afghanistan. This is, in my view, a global insurgency by extremists against American leadership of a world order based on Western values. And that includes Iran in that support of extremism. Would you both agree with that characterization?
Yes.
Yes.
And that we are dealing with a multi-generational war against extremism, against an ideology, much like the war that we fought against the ideology of communism, and that we need a whole-of-government strategy to undermine the ideology, everything from girls' education to women's empowerment, economic opportunities, in addition to the military aspects of that. Would you agree that we need that, and frankly, that it's been lacking in the last 20 years of that whole-of-government approach?
Absolutely, I do. You have to get at the root causes and delegitimize the ideology. Absolutely.
I think we need it. I'm not sure to what degree. I'd have to look back and understand whether it's been lacking or not, or where and when it's been lacking. But the third piece of that is you have to have a culture of people willing to accept those ideas as well. And you have to have, it has to be organic, that some part of that population has to be receptive to those ideas. So that's critical.
So what we're talking, we're talking about individual battles here, from Syria to Iraq to Afghanistan, in that, I think, that broader conflict where we do need that whole-of-government approach. Do you believe, General Milley, in your military opinion, do you believe that ISIS and al-Qaeda can and will resurge, will regain capability, and has the intent to attack the homeland if we allow it?
The second one first. Do they have the intent to attack the homeland? Yes, they absolutely do. We know that with certainty. Do I believe they'll resurge if we withdraw all of our capabilities and support to the indigenous governments and we don't continue to operate by, with, and through them? Then I believe that the conditions will be set for the resurgence.
You do not believe then, just approaching it another way, that the Syrian Democratic Forces, whether that's in Syria, the Afghan National Security Forces in Afghanistan, the Iraqi security forces currently have the independent capability without U.S. support
I do not believe
to prevent
they have
that resurgence?
I don't believe they have the independent capability right this minute. That's
so
true.
In the near term, a full withdrawal would endanger the homeland?
It is my belief that's correct.
Okay. Syria in particular, I just want to focus on that a moment. It just seems to me that we have discordant objectives here. On the one hand, our objective is ensuring the defeat of ISIS and the enduring defeat of ISIS. Yet, would you agree that the Assad regime, backed by Iran, backed by Russia, with the war crimes that they have committed in bombing hospitals and refugee camps, are essentially driving Sunni recruits to ISIS? On the one hand, by allowing Assad to continue its streak of murderous attacks across Syria, we are furthering ISIS. So my question is, what is our policy? And you can submit that for the record. What is our policy towards Russia, the Assad regime, and Iran? Actually, I still have 20 seconds.
I'll just say broad-based. This was asked a couple times. Our overarching goal with regard to Syria is to come up with a UN-sponsored political settlement between the parties that ends the civil war, and it hits those three topics I've mentioned before: objectives, not a safe haven for terrorists, not dominated by any power, in this case Iran, hostile to the United States, and contributes to a global security strategic energy market.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield for the record. Ms. Slotkin.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. You know, I want to go back to this decision, the president's decision to allow the Turks to go into northern Syria. And I would offer, Mr. Secretary, that the only reason you're sitting here today is because General Mattis resigned almost exactly a year ago today on the basis of the president threatening this very decision. So I think it makes perfect sense that we're talking about it. Can I just ask, I think this issue really resonated with voters back home in our districts, not because they understand every in and out of where Syria is and who the Kurds are and all the players. They understood that the American handshake has to mean something, and that when we shook hands with the Kurds, we gave them the commitment at the 3- and 4-star level that we would work with them. And when they died with us on the battlefield, that meant something to us, and we wouldn't create a situation where they're running for their lives and their families are an internally displaced people. So let me ask you a question. Is our plan in Syria and in fighting terrorism from Africa to Afghanistan still working by, with, and through local partners?
Yes, Congresswoman, it is. But let me go back to what you,
No, I'm sorry. No.
But this is too important.
Mr. Secretary, no, Mr. Secretary, you've said that is you working by, with, and through.
But
and
you
what
made
I
an
want to
inaccurate
understand,
statement, and I want
what I want to understand is in the future of our terrorist fights in West Africa, in all these places, the demonstration of going to the Kurds and telling them that we are leaving them, does that make it easier or harder to find partners to work by, with, and through for the next terrorist threat? Just harder? Be honest.
I'm being honest.
Be straight. And Secretary Mattis was as straight as they come. Be honest.
Ms. Slotkin, I'm sorry. If you have a statement to make, you may make a statement.
Does it make it easier or harder?
I will give you more time in a second. Yield for just a moment. If you have a statement to make, you may make the statement. I don't want witnesses badgered up here. You ask him a question, you have to give him a chance to answer. If you want to make a statement, perfectly within your right. But don't badger him when he's trying to answer the question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The handshake with the Kurds, with the SDF in particular, was a handshake that we would ensure that we would defeat ISIS. It was not a handshake that said, yes, we would also help you establish an autonomous Kurdish state. It was also not a handshake that said, yes, we would fight Turkey for you. That's the difference there I'm trying to make, the point we're trying to make. So whenever we make these handshakes with by, with, and through, which is our strategy, I think we need to be clear going forward as to what the extent of that relationship actually is.
Will that be harder or easier if you're in Mali or Burkina Faso or other places? Do you think that these partner groups would feel like they could trust us?
If we're clear and explicit with what the relationship is up front, yes.
You're the Secretary of Defense, and I know folks have talked about the authorization of military force, and I agree with most of my colleagues here that it desperately needs revision, and that is actually Congress's responsibility, which they have shirked. Can I ask right now, do you as Secretary of Defense believe that you have authorization based on any AUMF on the books to go to medium or long-term war with Iran?
We always have the right of self-defense, but to attack Iran, no, that's not, as a state-on-state attack, no.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Miss, I know we're a little over time, if you'll indulge me for just a minute here. Miss Sherrill.
Thank you, Secretary Esper and General Milley, for being here today. I myself served in Pensacola, so I do look forward to hearing more about your investigations into the foreign nationals on that base. General Milley, you stated that our objective is a secure Middle East. Given that we've defeated the physical caliphate, but knowing how important it is to protect those gains, because as Secretary Esper stated, we haven't defeated ISIS. And given our relationship with our Kurdish allies, who have certainly done a great deal of fighting for our shared objectives, excuse me, and now given that we are still conducting combined operations, presumably with the roughly, I think you said 500 troops that we have remaining to fight in the region, I guess I fail to see how the President's tweet to remove troops without coordination with the Pentagon or our own Kurdish allies aids our objective of a secure Middle East. So have you found that tweet, did you find that tweet to be helpful?
I'm not sure which tweet we're talking about. To say that the President made a decision without coordination with the Secretary and I is not true.
So he tweeted out that we were going to remove troops from Syria, and the Pentagon didn't know, but you were both aware that he was going to make that tweet?
I wasn't aware of a specific tweet, but the sequencing, I'm not exactly clear which tweet you're talking about.
I'm talking about the most recent tweet when he said he was going to remove the troops from Syria, not the months ago when he said we were going to do that. When Secretary Mattis resigned. I'm talking about the one after that.
You're talking about the one in October, when we pulled troops out of...
When we pulled troops out.
Yeah, I think that tweet, I believe that tweet happened after we talked, but I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and check. I guess my point is this. There was coordination and there was discussion between senior advisors and the president prior to him making a decision.
So the senior advisors knew, but none of our allies across the world. I mean, Mr. Crow just was just talking about his discussion with allies who, right before that tweet, had no idea that was coming. I'll tell you, many people in the Pentagon had no idea that was coming. But you had all discussed it internally and decided to do it without working with the Pentagon or our allies.
I can assure you there were discussions and deliberations done by members of the National Security Council with the President of the United States.
Did you recommend that you pull out of Syria? I personally
recommended that we pulled out 28 Special Forces soldiers in the face of 15,000 Turks that were going to invade.
I'm sorry, if the gentleman will yield for just one quick second, because this is a question enormously important to me. That's great.
Yes.
In December, now you were in different jobs at the time, but you were both in jobs.
December, a year ago, you mean?
Last year.
Are you talking about October? This past October.
I'm going a different place. It's a simple yes or no question. Just bear with me.
Yes.
In December, when you were the Secretary of the Army and you were the Army Chief of Staff, to your knowledge, did anyone in the Pentagon, before the President sent out his tweet saying that we were going to pull completely out of Syria and Afghanistan, did anyone in the Pentagon know that that announcement was coming when the President tweeted it, to your knowledge?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Chairman, I can't speak to that because
all I'm at, you can speak to that. To your knowledge, as the Secretary of the Army and the Chair of to your knowledge, did anyone in the Pentagon know that that announcement was coming?
I don't know, and I'm not trying to dodge because it's not a yes or no. As a service,
to your knowledge.
But
as
yes
or no.
I can't tell you. As a service secretary,
I don't know what you know.
I don't have no. As a service secretary, no. Not the service secretaries do not have an operational role.
I just asked a very narrow question.
I don't know.
I don't talk to people in the Pentagon. You're telling me that you're the Secretary of the Army and you're the Chairman of the Army Chief of Staff. You're hanging out in the Pentagon.
A year ago,
we're pulling out of Syria. They were talking about it for weeks. I didn't know.
A year ago, I don't know if anyone was told. October.
That's all I'm asking.
I guarantee.
October.
I know about that, but the earlier decision is the really important one here, in my opinion. I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Sherrill. Please go ahead.
Well, I'm also confused because now, so it's my understanding that you were deliberating with some number of people, and you suggested then the president pull out 28 troops?
Mm-hmm. Let me review the bidding here. There were a variety of intelligence reports going back as far as early August of a considerable buildup of Turkish forces and capabilities with the intent to invade northern Syria and establish a buffer zone. President Erdogan went to the United Nations and held up a map and did declaratory policy and said he was going to do that. When I became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, one of the very first calls I made was to the Chad of Turkey to say, what are you doing? And he said, we are going to do this. And we cannot guarantee the safety of the American forces that are in the way. Those reports went to the Secretary of Defense,
so
President,
our NATO allies said we are going to do this, and we're going to run right through American troops.
Right. That is
exactly
right.
And we did not talk to our allies, and we did not go
talk to our allies.
Well, they seem remarkably unaware that we were going to do this.
I don't know which allies you're referring to.
I'm talking about Jordan. I'm talking about allies throughout the region. I'm talking about Israel. I'm talking about our allies in the region who seem to not understand that we were going to pull troops out. Which allies were you talking to, I guess, is the question.
I'm talking about Britain, France, and Israel. And they were personally called about the discussions and the situation. And they were all fully aware of the possibilities and the discussions and the situation. The key people. I'm not going to speak for every member of the government. And then...
Well, I'll speak for Netanyahu and...
I'm not going to speak for Netanyahu. I know who I call. But my point being is there were deliberations. And there were 15,000 Turkish soldiers, and we had all the intelligence indicators to clearly indicate that orders were written and sent, rehearsals were complete, and they were going to attack. There were 28 United States Special Forces Green Berets. And I am not going to allow 28 American soldiers to be killed and slaughtered just to call someone's bluff. There has been a lot of criticism.
I don't understand what these 28 troops you're referring to are. We had 1,000 troops. What? And you wanted to
along the axis
28?
along the axis of advance.
Sorry.
The initial axis of advance. Was
I apologize.
Of their invasion, we had 28 soldiers.
I apologize. I apologize. And again, I really, if everyone, and I agree, once the president made the announcement 6 months before in a tweet that we were pulling out of Syria, and this is absolutely what happened. When that tweet was made, everyone went, oh my God, what did he do? And you all went, well, we got to figure this out. And it is my opinion, everything you just said, sir, is what Erdogan did after the president unilaterally, without consulting the Pentagon, to my knowledge, without even consulting the National Security Council, said, we're pulling out of Syria. It is my opinion, and someone can disavow me of this notion at some point, that was the moment when Erdogan said, okay, I can do this. And then, yes, over the course of the next 6 to 7 to 8 months, he planned it out, which then led to the series of events which you have told us and described, and I think it's accurate. Because the other thing is, we had over 3,000 troops in Syria when the president made that announcement. By the time we got to all that you just described, that number was way down. And it was way down, I'm sorry, I'll just say this bluntly, it was way down not because it was in the national security interests of the United States for it to be way down. It was way down because the president was trying to fulfill a campaign promise. And he did not consult the Pentagon before he made that announcement and started us down this path. Now, I'm very sympathetic. Once we started down that path, you guys had to figure out how to make it work. And you really worked hard at it. I know Secretary Dunford did as well. He desperately tried to find partners who could fill in for us leaving. He did. He was just unable to do it. But that's the discussion I want to have. And I'm sorry, it's frustrating for me. We get it. There were only 25 troops there. We couldn't possibly defend them. I agree. I completely agree. But that was started before then. I do have to give Mr. Thornberry a chance to respond to this point. And then I do want to get to Ms. Escobar if I could. I'd said I would. I apologize. I know you guys are pushing on time, but this is a really important point. And I'm really not trying to make a political point. But if we don't understand that, I want someone to go over to the White House and say, we'd really prefer you not to do this again, okay? That we have a process. The tweets have far more power than people realize on our policy. Let's try to calm that down. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. Mr. Thornberry.
Mr. Chairman, it's a far more complicated story than that. It is true in December, now a year ago, the President issued his text. There were immediate conversations, I know personally, between members of the House and the Senate with the President and others at the White House related to that tweet. And without going into all of the ins and outs over weeks, it is also true that there were other partners who did step up to assist in the work in Syria. And again, I have personal knowledge of a number of those conversations with partners. So the bottom line is the President made a tweet. There was a lot of work and conversation. We did not withdraw from Syria. And we had partners working with us. I do not believe it was inevitable that what happened in October was going to come. Now, I understand your point that once he said that it was going to happen one way or another. I can just say I believe it's a more complicated story with a number of people who have been emphasizing to the White House and to partners that we all need to be there together because we had a lot at stake. And there was some success with that, and obviously President Erdogan saw an opening. And just to emphasize, I think the decision made by the Secretary and the Chairman to safeguard American lives when they made it was absolutely the right decision. I have qualms with the original tweet, as you know. I don't think that was right. And that's part of the reason I was involved in some of those conversations to ensure that we can continue to safeguard American interests in that region.
Thank you, Rich. Ms. Escobar, I apologize. I thought that was important. If you could, I know we're over time here, just give you a couple quick minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and for your testimony. I'm going to pick up where my colleague, Ms. Sherrill, left off. And I want to be clear in understanding this. So, Chairman, you gave the recommendation because you had gotten notice from Turkey that American troops their safety and security could not be guaranteed by our NATO ally, and that they were about to invade, and if something happens to American troops, well, something happens to American troops. Am I understanding that correctly?
It's about right. That's correct.
Okay. So
I would add that I made the recommendation as well. It was my assessment in discussions I had with my counterpart in the weeks leading up to the events of that date.
Was there an effort to negotiate with Turkey to ask them to stand down, to not do it?
Yes.
And
Very intense effort.
How long did that effort go on before the recommendation was made?
Weeks. We had been working on this for actually months with the Turks to restrain them by going through a number of diplomatic actions, military actions on the ground, trying to set up the safe zone, all these things we were trying to do diplomatically, militarily, et cetera, while the buildup was happening that the chairman described earlier, to pull them back from crossing into northern Syria.
Was the president involved? Did he pick up the phone? Did he call our ally? Did he make the case himself for Turkey not going forward with its plan?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know all the calls the president does or does not make, but even if I knew, I wouldn't convey that to you because it's, those conversations are private between me and the Commander-in-Chief.
I would be interested in a classified setting to learn that information. This is...
I still wouldn't share it with you, Congresswoman. It's
Okay.
just as I wouldn't share a conversation between me and you publicly or with anybody.
I think this is an important point to me, not even as a member of Congress, but as an American, to know that we have troops that have been working side by side with allies. And you're right. There was a handshake deal, not not a specific commitment. However, there is something to be said for a handshake deal, for a mutually beneficial relationship that has benefited American safety and security tremendously, that has allowed us to push back on terrorism and on ISIS. And so you'll have to forgive me, but this idea that while you're correct that it wasn't in the fine print that we were going to really be a good, strong ally, that is distressing to me as an American.
No, I appreciate that. And look, we've both been there, but not only was it not in the fine print, it wasn't in the bold print. Never did we put on the table. In fact, I've spoken to our commanders about this. Some of them were very clear that we're not here. We're not going to defend you against Turkey.
And Mr. Secretary, I understand that. I think what is equally distressing to me is to hear that a NATO ally was about to run roughshod over American troops, and I wonder if the president got involved. So that's a question, obviously, that you're saying not even in a classified setting you'd be willing to answer. Do you all know?
I don't know I don't know the answer to begin with. I said even if I did, I would.
Well, that's distressing as well, because if we're negotiating to protect American troops and to prevent an ally from creating what is now a deeply unsettling situation. I mean, 200,000 civilians have been displaced. We've seen genocide occurring. I am now concerned, and I'd like your opinion, that part of what drives people into the arms of ISIS and what promotes terrorism is that instability, this feeling that you don't have a future. If there's anything that I've learned while serving on this committee, is that kind of hopelessness is a breeding ground. Right. Is there a breeding ground right now in Syria for ISIS?
I can't comment on that. I just don't know. know, but let me tell you this, what the Turks would say, and I'm not defending the Turkish action, but they would say, look, this has gone on for them for decades, if not a couple hundred years, of this conflict between
But Mr.
Kurds and
Secretary,
Turks.
with all due respect, we had a situation that was far more under control before than it is today.
Yes
Would
and
you
no,
agree?
Congresswoman. If you recall from the earliest days, when this SDF was first set up under the Obama administration, there was unhappiness, vocal, public concern by the Turks about the relationship. And they had made 2 previous incursions into Syria to address what they thought was a terrorist problem.
And we will.
None of these.
Yeah, I don't want to. I know you guys have been very generous with your time, and I think that was a good point. I know you got to go, so I don't want to cut you off. At the same time, I also want to respect your time. And I thank you very much for being here. We are adjourned.